Hey, everybody, welcome to another edition of Off Topic. My name is Randy Zellea, coming for you live from the swamps of New Jersey during this pandemic. I guess we're doing all shows via from the basement, I guess best way of calling it. And joining me today, my great friend who covers the New York Giants for, Patty, I think we've been doing this for longer than we would like to admit. Patty Traina from GiantsCountry.com. And she pretty much writes everywhere. From SI, she's everywhere. You can also follow her from the Lockdown Giants podcast.
Locked On, yep.
So, like I said, Patty, you are absolutely everywhere. So it's good to have you on with me this morning. I really appreciate it, and I think we're all going a little stir crazy.
Yeah, we are. But you know what, Randy? It's good to see a familiar face. I was just saying yesterday to my husband, I said, I miss the guys in the press room. I miss Randy. I miss Emery and Ed and Chris and our whole little crew that we had usually sit together with down at the end of the Giants press box. And I really miss that banter and that interaction. And I don't know what the next few months or what this season are going to hold, but fingers crossed we get to see each other soon.
Yeah, I was saying the other day too. I was telling a couple people when we were on we were all watching the draft and we were doing these draft calls, and Ed said that he was sitting there wearing he was there in his boxer shorts or something, and you tweeted back going, "Ew."
Yeah, that's the banter I miss. I mean,
yeah, it's great, and I love the group that we have. We're all very, very supportive of each other. Jason, Chris,
Ed.
Ed. And the funny thing is, Greg Johnson sits in the middle of all of us, and he just doesn't say anything. And I joked with him the other day. I'm like, "You miss us yet?" He's like, "I'm pretty much the same." I'm like, "Yeah, because you don't say anything." So,
Invisible man.
Yeah. So it's been a very interesting offseason for everybody, obviously. Zoom workouts, and I believe now the players are allowed in the facility as long as they can get there. And training. They announced today that training camp is probably going to be at all team facilities. Let's back up a little bit, because I think the last time we all really saw each other was when Pat Shurmur was still on a press box. No, not at the podium at the last game of the year. I think that was the last time I got to see everybody, and because I didn't have the opportunity to make it to Joe Judge's press conference. Your opinion, just if we're starting back from the beginning of offseason to now, do you think everything was handled the way it was supposed to be as far as Pat Shurmur was concerned? Bringing Joe Judge in, it's the change of a culture. The culture change with a coach is the key. What did you think of the final days of Pat Shurmur leading into Joe Judge?
Well, I mean, Pat Shurmur, let me make it clear. I liked the guy. I thought he was a good man. I don't want to say he was in over his head in the same way as, Ben McAdoo. With that said, I don't think Pat Shurmur necessarily helped himself in some instances. Number one, I thought his coaching staff, he had some good members of his coaching staff, but there were some areas in which the coaching was lacking, and you could see that in the performance of the players. And I thought that was a big, big problem. The other problem I had with Pat Shurmur was him being his own play caller and him being stubborn enough to stick with things that weren't working. For example, those inside zone runs with Saquon Barkley, they weren't working. And yet he kept running them, hoping for different results. And what's that old saying, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So to me, I was concerned by that, because I'm saying to myself, okay, Barkley has to fight for just about every yard he gets. And now you're giving extra pounding to this kid who's coming off of an ankle injury, a high ankle sprain, and you're going to wear him out before he turns 25 at this rate. So just little things like that. And then also not using Daniel Jones's natural scrambling abilities, just little things that just irked me, because it just seemed like the whole coaching staff, and I'm going to open it up to the defensive side here. It's like they had a system. Whether or not the players fit the system, it was like, we're going to run our system and we'll worry about the results later.
I think it was the Dallas game where it was the Monday night game against Dallas, where after the game, you had players complaining about guys playing man and zone defense, and then zone and man defenses and stuff like that, and just the miscommunication. When we all said to each other, "How do you let that happen?" And he felt like the coaching staff and everyone was calling for Betcher's head. I think game 4 of the season last year, and things just unraveled really quickly. And then obviously the situation with Eli and stepping away. How much of a relief do you think it is for Daniel Jones not to have Eli Manning over his shoulder at this point anymore? I know from a mentorship, I bet you he would love to still have him there. But
yeah,
so,
yeah. I mean,
Daniel now.
Daniel admitted it. He said, at times it was weird, and it was. I mean, think about it. Put yourself in the kid's shoes. You're now the leader of the offense, but sitting behind you is that guy wearing that C on his chest and, Hall of Fame quarterback. And even though Eli wasn't a jerk about it, he was, he faded into the background. He made sure not to interfere or to upend the kid or upstage him or whatever. He was still there. And, it kind of reminded me, and I know this is maybe not the same type of comparison, but it's the closest thing I can come to. When Ben McAdoo was hired, do you remember how Tom Coughlin was kind of hanging around the facility in the beginning there for his workouts? And it was like, okay, this is a guy who basically walked away, but he's still there. And Ben McAdoo, never admitted that it bothered him, but I can't imagine that he was okay with it. I just can't, because, you have a legend, a guy who was successful behind you, who's there every day. I mean, I just don't see how that could be an issue for anybody. So getting back to your point about Daniel Jones, yes, having Eli there was good in terms of mentorship and what he could learn from him. But, when you're trying to lead an offense and, you have some people who maybe aren't buying it, maybe don't buy in fully to you yet because you're a rookie and you haven't proved yourself and they don't really know as much about you as they do about Eli. I could see where that would be awkward.
And not only that, too, I almost felt at times like Eli obviously avoided us. Like Eli barely talked to us as it was when he was starting. But like I honestly felt that everybody was trying to avoid the elephant in the room with all three, with Shurmur was trying to avoid the topic. Daniel Jones didn't want to have the conversation about it. And obviously Eli didn't. And I was happy that Eli was able to get those last 2 games, once against Philly, because he got to have his national TV, still show that he can still play, and then his win against Miami and having the crowd yell for him and having that great send off with the press conference. I don't think you can write more of a story like ending than that. And he showed class from the minute the decision was made all the way down. You can't ask for more.
No, I mean, and I could sit here, Randy. I've covered Eli since he came into the league, and it's funny because on the Locked On Giants podcast, we've been doing time machine themes, and I went back to 2004, Eli's first season. And this is going to sound cheesy, I know, but I'm going to say it anyway. One of my greatest pleasures in this job is when these young men come in and they're basically fresh-faced little boys, that are coming out of school and, oh my God, I'm on my own for the first time. And they grow into, husbands and fathers and just leaders and men. And just to see that, I feel very honored to see that with Eli Manning. I mean, you knew he was going to be okay as, when he came out because of his background and his family upbringing, but to have witnessed that, and not just with Eli, but with a lot of guys, Zach Biasi is another one. Who I think is moving on. I don't know if he's retired or not, but he's another one who I had the pleasure of watching come in as this young, fresh-faced kid. And, here it is 10, 12 years later, he's a father, a husband and a businessman, a leader. It's just very rewarding from a personal standpoint.
I don't know, after you take Eli and Zach out, who the longest tenure guy, I think is Shep.
Yeah, I think
Shep
so.
might be one of
either is it Shep or Tomlinson? It might be Shep, I think.
I think it is Shep. I think I'll have to look, but those 2 guys are the age statesmen in the locker room, which is very scary. That's crazy. That's really crazy when you think about it. There's not a lot of guys from the 2016, 2017 draft even still here. Last when Gettleman came aboard, he did a lot of cleaning out of Oh my God, his name goes for blank. The previous regime. I'm
Jerry Reese.
Jerry Reese. I'm sorry. Wow, mental fart. Yeah, Jerry Reese's guys are all gone. You know,
Most of them.
Almost all of them. Shep,
Yeah, almost all of them.
Shep and Thompson are
and Engram.
And Engram. Okay, there's
less than 5, I think.
Yeah, but that he's the next one we got to transition to is Evan Engram. Were you surprised that the Giants picked up the option on him?
No, not really. I mean, look, I know Evan Engram has had some problems staying on the field, but it's interesting, Randy. I've always thought the Giants have misused Evan Engram. They haven't used him to his fullest potential. And by that, I mean, you do not ask this guy to block a 200 or 300-pound defensive end. I mean, you're asking for trouble. Engram, I know, takes pride in his blocking, but he's not, when you think of the classic tight ends that have been good blockers, you think of Howard Cross. He comes to mind. Howard was a brick house, okay? You could not get past Howard. Dan Campbell was a good blocker. Jeremy Shockey, before he got injured, was a good blocker. Evan Engram is more of a receiver in a tight end's body. So to ask him to block these big guys, I just think you're going to wear him down. It goes back to working harder versus working smarter. And I just think the Giants didn't really take full advantage of what Evan Engram brought to the table. Now, who knows? Maybe this year they used him more as a receiver and they limit his blocking to blocking on the move or something that, doesn't match him up against a bigger man. And maybe Evan Engram, lasts through the season. You don't know that. I mean, I think they owe it to themselves to try it at least. And if it works out, great. And if it doesn't, then you move on. You've got him signed. And if you want to trade him at mid-season, you can look to do that.
Yeah, one of my big arguments is he's been able to stay on the field, and the way he's been used has not been to his full potential. I felt like last year, obviously Daniel was getting used to his weapons on the field. Darius Slayton is a guy that he's been able to connect with, and Shep was staying on and off the field. I never felt that I felt like Engram has been the odd man out, and now that Red Ellison is now gone, and Scott Simonson is Scott even.
No, I think they moved on from him. They have Caden Smith and they brought in Levine Tololo from Frisco.
Yes. So Evan, they have contingency plans at this point for Evan. So if he gets hurt, they have weapons there. So I'm understanding to the point where the Giants are now being precautious. They opted in, but this is it. Like if it doesn't work with them this year, they can cut ties with them.
They've committed to him for next year, but I guess if it doesn't work, they can maybe look to trade him, especially if Caden Smith, pops up and becomes, the number one guy. But look, Evan Engram, I still say it. He has a lot of talent, and I know fans are frustrated with him because he seems to get hurt every time you turn around. I just wonder again, is it because of what they've been asking him to do? Think about it for a second. He had the sprained foot. I don't know exactly when that injury happened, on what play, but why would you ask this guy to block a defensive end who outweighs him by 30, 40, 50 pounds? It just doesn't make sense to me. And why not line him up in the slot, take advantage of some of these mismatches? I think, Randy, going back to your question about Pat Shurmur, one of the things that frustrated me is we saw all these cool things they were doing on offense in practices. Remember during the OTAs and the mini camps, and we were like, wow, this offense is going to be sick this year. And then come the games and we never saw that stuff. No. And fans would be like, what are you talking about? You said you saw, Barkley on wheel routes, or you saw Evan Engram in the slot. And it'd be like, well, it's true. We did see it. We would be like, ask anybody who was there. And that was frustrating. And I'm hoping that, once they do hit the practice field, that, Joe Judge and Jason Garrett in particular, since he's going to be in charge of the offense, that they use these talents that they have to their fullest to their fullest potential. I don't think that was the case last year. And I think that was, that's why the Giants struggled, and that's why Pat Shermer kind of did himself in.
Yeah, and I also felt from a media perspective, you can tell. What was the expression? You don't lose 9 games in a row and keep your job. And I think that Pat became very irritable with us. And I think
Passive aggressive.
Yeah, he became very passive aggressive with us, and I saw that with Ben too. Towards the end, Ben was becoming very passive aggressive with us. He felt like he didn't have to really answer any of our questions, or when we were questioning some of the decisions he was making. Why can't you just go with what I'm doing and that's it? No, we have to ask why you're doing it. It's part of the gig, and I just felt it's didn't get it.
Yeah, I mean, coaches need to understand we're there not to roast them per se, but people want to find out. The paying customers want to find out, why did you punt on 4th and 1 in that situation, or why didn't you try the field goal? The fans can't go up to the coaches and ask that. That's what we're there for. I mean, a lot of times I hear from Twitter followers who write me an email and they say, hey, can you find out this, this, and this? And if I get the opportunity to do that, and I think it's, if it's a valid question, yeah, we're going to slip that in, because that's what we're here for. We're not here to, at least speaking for myself and probably for you and a few others, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I'm here to get information. I'm not here to stoke fires and roast a coach because he made a stupid call. Maybe he thought it was the best for at that time. Okay, explain to me why you thought it was the best, and let me use my logic and knowledge of the game to say, okay, you know what? Maybe he has a point there. I agree with him versus, nah, sorry, dude, I'm not buying that.
Yeah, and I think the ultimate sign of disrespect, I think, happened 2 years ago. I think it was with Ben, where Ben, somebody asked a question and he basically just said, well, if you think you could do the job better, then maybe you should be in this spot. And when I heard that answer, I'm just like, there's a guy who's losing his job.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. And Randy, it doesn't have to be like that.
Yeah.
Look, I get it. We all have bad days. I know all of us have been questioned by our readers, our listeners, or whatever. And you make decisions based on based on the information you have at the time and what you feel is best. I mean, I can write an article and say, oh, this is the best thing. This is going to draw, thousands of views. And maybe it turns out to be a dud. Whereas I'll write an article and I'll be like, yeah, this is, like this. And then all of a sudden it's going viral, so you just don't know. And I think, in the case of McAdoo and Shurmur, I think they got a little too sensitive there towards the end. This is not an easy market to be in. It just isn't. It's very populated with media. The fans are very passionate. They're very knowledgeable. And that's the other thing, sometimes, I got the impression like the coaches, they're like, well, we know, and the fans don't know anything. And I think they were making a mistake there, selling the fans short, because the fans are knowledgeable and they do know.
And what's even more frustrating from a fan's point, and even a player perspective, because the players know how passionate the fans are, and they know, because I've been to so many events where the players and the fans are interacting, and the fans are breaking down the plays to the players, and the players are starting to explain that. It's a different age of football where it was 10, 15 years ago, where the fan just shows up on Sunday and watches and just says, oh, I wonder this. The age of social media and the I guess the availability of knowledge of the game being so readily with the internet as well, and so people can understand it. Like, I have my girlfriend's son is a basketball fanatic, and he watches YouTube videos and he starts breaking down plays at the age of 9. You know what I mean?
Wow.
A little savant. He's something else. But I'm just saying, these kids and these fans today have all this at their fingertips at a time when you and I were growing up, we did not. So I think the coaches have to understand that. The players have caught on, but it looks like the coaches haven't. Are you your first impressions of Joe Judge? I love the no nonsense attitude. He's establishing the culture now. I feel a different presence with him than I did with McAdoo and Shermer. What has been your take so far?
Yeah, I agree. I actually was thinking about this the other day, and I kind of went back and I listened to McAdoo's opening press conference and Shermer's, and then I went back and I listened to Judge's. And everybody says the same thing. Oh, we're going to install a new culture. We're going to turn this around, rah, rah, rah. And then there are guys who, come in and you can kind of, they talk a good game, but they don't really have a plan, or maybe they're kind of making it up as they go along. With Joe Judge, I kind of got the impression that not only does he have a plan, but he believes in it, and he hasn't deviated from it. I was more convinced from what I heard from him than I have to say I was when I heard from McAdoo and Shurmur at their introductory pressers. Yeah. I felt with McAdoo, and I don't mean to sound like I'm slamming him. I felt like he was making it up as he went along because he was so inexperienced. What I like about Joe Judge is that he's smart enough to admit what he doesn't know. And he has surrounded himself with such a really good staff. I mean, wow. How many times, Randy, did we talk about this last year in the press box? You, me, Chris, Ed, Emery, we all talked about this. Coaching is such a big, big difference, but yet it's underrated. Yeah. So Judge, he surrounded himself with 4 ex-head coaches, 2 at the NFL level, 2 at the college level. He's got all kinds of different experience, from college coaches who were career, college people, to former NFL coaches. I mean, and these are guys who are teachers. And what I love about this coaching staff, Randy, is that if you look at the 3 areas where the Giants were really lacking last year, the defensive secondary, linebacker, offensive line, they have guys who played the position either at the NFL level or the college level coaching that group. And I like that. I think that's a key, whether that was done purposely or not, I think that's key to this team's performance.
I think so too. And a lot of people were slamming the Giants about the hire of Jason Garrett. I actually think it's brilliant because he's an offensive mind. He did an excellent job of developing Dak Prescott. You might be able to take the development more of Daniel Jones. One of the things I found funny was Joe Judge's initial press conferences. People asked about Daniel Jones, and he was not committing. And then we all know that Daniel Jones is the quarterback for this team. But I was wondering if you think we're going to be like what Bill Belichick does with putting Tom Brady on the injury report every single week. And we're going to see that now with Daniel, that he's going to be questionable every single week. But what I think is going to be very interesting with the relationship between Daniel Jones and Joe Judge is we're going to find out real quick if Daniel's the man for Joe. I think that's going to, whether he's going to be mentally tough to handle, because Joe comes from a really tough system with New England and even from Alabama working with Nick Saban. It's no joke. So Daniel's going to have to be on his game.
Oh, absolutely. And, this is something a little different for Daniel, because in college, he had David Cutcliffe, who, is known as a quarterback whisperer. Okay. Shermer, for whatever faults he might have had, he was a quarterback whisperer. Judge is not a quarterback whisperer. He's a good coach, but quarterbacks and offense was never his specialty. So it's a little different dynamic. And that's why I agree with you. I think bringing in Jason Garrett, who, remember, was an NFL quarterback back in the day, played for the Giants for a couple of years. I think that was a huge, huge move. And I know a lot of Giant fans are like, oh, Jason Garrett, what did he do down in Dallas? He did. He developed Tony Romo. He developed Dak Prescott, and Jason has played the game at the NFL level. So he knows maybe a few more tricks, if you will, than maybe somebody who came up through the system and never played the position before.
Yeah, and I also like the fact too is you never really look at it like this, but when they do have those 2 meetings against Dallas, he might know a little bit about the weaknesses and the strengths of some of those guys that are down there too, which in some senses is going to help, in some senses may not matter at all. But you discussed the offensive line, which has been an absolute disaster since the last Super Bowl with this franchise. I've always joked around with you and Ed and Chris saying, just imagine if Eli's had somewhat of a decent offensive line since 2012, and Eli was still productive during those times. Just imagine if he would have had an offensive line. Some of the upgrades, and the fact that Gettleman is not inept to saying we want to solve this, because that was wasn't that one of his opening lines around draft time was, I want to solidify this offensive line problem once and for all. Has he done it? Has he done it at this point?
On paper, Yes. We've been saying that though for how many years?
True.
So look, I like that they finally addressed, offensive tackle. You know me, Randy. I've been screaming about offensive tackle for how many
Yes.
years now?
At
I've
least
said
four for
at least four because
at least four.
route they've gone, now, yeah, they tried to roll the dice on Eric Flowers, but all you had to do was watch the guy and you knew that the tackle wasn't his position, that he was more of a guard. And that goes back to the stubbornness and the coaching. Why didn't you see this? I mean, everybody else kind of alluded to that. And lo and behold, he goes down to Washington and Bill Callahan was his coach, and Bill Callahan's one of the best in the business, and says, hey, this guy is not a tackle, he's a guard. And lo and behold, look, Eric Flowers has now got a big contract down with Miami. So, were we all crazy for saying that? No, I don't think so. But it's all a matter of, how this unit comes together. Now, I am still concerned about the center position.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I think what they're going to do there is Spencer Pulley is going to be the starter. If I were the coach, I know that they like Nick Gates. I know that they've said that Nick Gates is a guy who can compete for that position. But because you didn't have an off season with workouts and whatnot, I wouldn't mess with, I wouldn't start experimenting in training camp. I think that's too late. So I think Spencer Pulley by default is going to be their center, and maybe they get Shane Lemieux ready down the line. But I don't know. I think with Nick Gates, and I'd like to see him play somewhere. I mean, I thought he did really, really well last year. I just wonder if maybe down the line he's going to ultimately step in for Kevin Zeitler, who is coming to the end of his contract. I think Zeitler has, I want to say, 2 more years. He has a pretty big cap number. Now, Zeitler's still a pretty good player, but at some point you have to kind of move on and turn the page and go to the youth.
Yeah, and that's always a very difficult story, as the Giants are always known for letting a guy go 1 year too soon than 1 year too late. We saw that with Justin Tuck. We saw that with many players in this organization. And we just talked about the center position. I don't know if you know this. I'm asking this question because I just don't know. Has there been any updates on John Jalapeno?
Well, he's been posting pictures of it or videos of his rehab. Look, John Jalapeno is one tough hombre. I mean, this is a guy, and Randy, you've spoken to John. He's a sweetheart of a guy too, but
I love him.
He is a guy who has worked so hard for this, and he. What I like about him is his attitude. He doesn't give up. People might have told him in the past, "Oh, you're not going to amount to anything. You're not going to be good in this league," and he believes in himself. And he believes in what he's doing. And it's unfortunate that he's had the injuries that he's had. The year before he had the broken ankle, and then this Achilles injury. It's unfortunate. With that said, you have to kind of look at the whole picture. Is John Jalapeno a starter? I don't know on this offensive line that he is. I do think he could be a valuable piece in terms of guard and center depth, which, I don't know how much they really have. If you think about it, if Spencer Pulley is your starting center, who's his backup right now? I think they have, I don't remember the kid's name, but I think they have an undrafted free agent, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it's a young veteran. But who's the backup right now to Spencer Pulley? They don't have one.
Right.
So you wonder to yourself and you say, okay, do you bring John Jalapeno back because he's played the position, he has a year of experience, and do you put him on the roster to be the backup while you're getting Shane Lemieux ready? And then do you maybe have Nick Gates be your backup at guard or maybe at one of the tackle spots, or you've got options now. And that's why, going back to the issue of center, the reason why I think it's going to be Spencer Pulley is because he has the most experience, and you have a quarterback who, is only entering his second year, who hasn't seen everything. If that were Eli Manning back there, I would say, you know what, go ahead and put Nick Gates back there. Go ahead and put, Shane Lemieux back there, because Eli is going to spot things. He's going to be able to make protections, and he's going to know what to do. Daniel Jones is still learning on that. So I just think it would behoove the Giants to put an experienced center back there. Now, I don't think that Spencer Pulley is the long-term answer, but I think for the short term, I think he can, step in, and I think they can work around that issue.
Yeah, and as far as the only thing with John too is I think he's a great locker room guy. I know Will Hernandez said that he learned so much from John, and some of the younger players too. And I also, like you just said before, the options in the past, the Giants haven't had the options. They've had been able to just throw what they've had out there, and that was it. So I think that's a very, very, very big difference. From a defensive side, and last year reminded me too very much of the 2006 season with less experienced guys, but it just felt like there was a lot of big plays being let up, a lot of confusion, just like it was in 2016, not 2006, 2016, with when Coughlin's last year, the defense couldn't catch a cold in 2016. And last year, it was similar. The difference is there's less veterans on the defensive squad last year, just a lot of young guys. Do they have the right mix this year? Looking what they bought in and what they have coming back out, the Baker situation put aside.
Yeah. Again, Randy, on paper it looks good, but again, we've been saying that every year. I do think, in trying to piece together what Patrick Graham might be looking to do. We've heard Judge and Dave Gettleman say, "Oh, we'll generate a pass rush through the scheme." And people are like, okay, how's that going to work? That's what basically we heard the last couple of years with James Betcher. What I do think they're trying to do is the strength of that team right now, or of that defense, is the defensive front. They didn't really make a whole lot of changes to that group. They just brought in, Austin Johnson from Tennessee, an unrestricted free agent. But otherwise, they didn't really get rid of anybody at the end of last year. So that to me says that they're going to really put an emphasis on pushing that pocket and creating gaps and whatnot for the back end to rush. Now, if you go back and you look at what Patrick Graham did in Miami, he had a lot of blitzes coming in from the defensive secondary. Linebackers were shooting gaps and whatnot. That's what I think he's looking to do here, and that's what I think they mean when they say they're going to try and scheme this, as opposed to, okay, we've got a Nick Bosa, for example. We've got a Nick Bosa type of pass rusher, and we're just going to move him around and let him do his thing and beat the heck out of opposing offensive tackles. That's not what I don't think they're going to do. They're going to try and scheme it. You're going to see pass rushing coming from all ends. And do they have the right personnel? That remains to be seen. My biggest concern is the defensive secondary, because in order for the plan to work, they have to hold their guys. And we can go back and we can look at history here, recent history. How many times did the Giants pass rush come this close to getting to the quarterback? And they probably would have gotten the quarterback if the back end of the defense had held their coverage a little longer, not let guys get past them or behind them or, juke them out of their sneakers. I mean, there were too many instances like that. So that defensive secondary is still relatively young. They did add James Bradbury, who, by the way, people were complaining about, oh, why didn't they go for Byron Jones? James Bradbury's been just as, if not more productive than Jones in fewer snaps. I went and I looked this up and I wrote an article about it, so I have the data. But yeah, that's a concern. But you know what? I like the talent. I like the combination of Jabril Peppers and Xavier McKinney at safety. I think that's an upgrade. Antoine Bethea last year, smart man, a really good man, but he lost steps. It was pretty obvious. I don't know what they're going to do with the other cornerback spot. Obviously DeAndre Baker's situation needs to play out. I don't anticipate they will have him this year while that plays out, because, the legal system doesn't get resolved overnight, unfortunately. So,
especially during a pandemic.
Yeah. And you have the pandemic. Exactly. So I think, between Sam Beal, who, if he could stay healthy, I think he has some potential there. I think you'll also see Corey Ballantyne compete for that spot. But it all comes down to who stays healthy and who takes the biggest jump in terms of understanding what they're doing. Because sometimes you don't have to be the most talented guy out there, but if you know your thing and you know how things are developing and you can anticipate, you can play a lot faster than what you actually are. And we've seen that throughout history, regardless of the teams. We've seen many examples of that. To give you one for the Giants, go back to 2007. They had a guy by the name of James Butler who was a safety who went undrafted. But my gosh, you go back and you read interviews with Steve Spagnuolo, and he sings the praises of that guy because he was so smart and he knew what to do, and he was able to anticipate that he was able to play faster. And that's the key.
Yeah, and it's funny too. You said Sam Beal before, and his name rings in my head. If he can stay healthy is the big question, and he's had such health issues over the last, especially last season, but the last 2 seasons has been rough for him. What do you think for him? Do you think at this point, if he makes it through camp, he can contribute? I think that's always been my big thing with him. He sat all of camp last year.
Yeah, I forget why. I think he had a hamstring. I think that's what ended up costing him the first half of the season. I think it was a hamstring, and then at the end of the year, he missed the regular season finale. I think because he had a shoulder injury.
Mm-hmm.
The kid's got talent, and he's got the right attitude and the right approach. But the old saying is, the best ability is availability, and that he just hasn't been able to deliver. And at some point, you could have a guy who's extremely talented, but if he's not on the field, you have to move on. You can't just sit there and wait and wait and wait. I mean, we're all getting older here, so eventually you've got to know when to cut your losses. So I do think this year's going to be a big year for Sam Beal. And if he ends up injured again, or if he doesn't deliver the goods, I think, I hate to say it, but they could be looking at another bust there.
Yeah, no, it's true. Real quick, one of the last things I definitely wanted to do with you is we got the schedule, and it's an interesting one this year, to say the least. If you look at the schedule, I don't want to go up and down the whole entire thing, but besides this, as I like to call it, the sexy games, like the 49ers game is going to be at home, the opening night on Monday for Monday Night Football. Are there any games that stick out to you, and do you have a number of wins for the season for the Giants?
The games that stick out for me start in week 5 because the Giants play 5 out of their 6 games starting in week 5 against NFC East opponents. Okay. That's, now if the season starts on time, fingers crossed, that it starts on time, by week 5, you are hoping that the teams are playing their best football, that any, preseason kinks are worked out. I think that's going to be an important stretch for the Giants because, look, the last few years, this team has not done well against division opponents.
No.
And you and I both know that the path to the playoffs starts with winning in the division. So I look at that stretch as the most important one for the Giants. They have to come out winning the majority of those games. And they have to be playing their best football at that point. They have to be, clicking on all cylinders. So if that doesn't happen and they, have a losing record during that stretch, then I'm not so sure that they're going to finish with a good record for the season. I mean, and get back to the playoffs. As far as the number of wins, I haven't really sat down and tried to do that because I believe in taking one game at a time now. I can look at the matchups and whatnot, but there's so many unknown variables, Randy, that I just think it would be, I don't know that it would be doing anybody any justice to sit here and say, oh, they're definitely going to win 8 games or 9 games or stuff like that. I know some sites and some writers have done it. I've tried not to do it because I don't see the point in it. It's so, we don't even know if there's going to be a full season. So what's the point of even, going down that path?
Agreed. When the schedule came out, I was joking around with a few people and I said, well, if you go by the schedule from what it is, last year, I believe it or not, Chris and I joked around about it, and I was right on the money. I said, at best, this was going to be a 500 team. If everything went right, the ball bounced, you got every call the way it was supposed to go. This is the best of 500 team. Otherwise, I looked at it as a 4 to 6 win team. This season, I look at this schedule and I look at the team, and because of all the unknowns, you could be looking from anywhere from a playoff team all the way down to 4 wins again, because of the way the schedule is built out. Because you have the Cowboys are going to be are ready to to be at that next level. Mike McCarthy's an excellent coach for that team to set a culture down there. You have the Steelers, who are always going to be difficult, whether Ben is 130 years old or not. You have Tom Brady down in Tampa, which is going to be very interesting. So the schedule is difficult. It's a tough schedule by any means. You don't know what Washington is because you have a whole new culture there. And Philadelphia has always played the Giants stuff anyway. So, like you said, it starts with the division, and the division hasn't gotten any easier this offseason.
No, it hasn't. But, the good news is everybody's in the same boat. A lot of people ask me, are the Giants at a disadvantage? Because Washington has a head coach, in Ron Rivera, who's been there, done it. Mike McCarthy down in Dallas has been there, done that. And I don't necessarily Giants, I can see the perspective why it would be, but everybody's in the same boat. Everybody's trying to install new offenses and defenses, and nobody's been able to hit the field to work on all that stuff. So, you could have, the second coming of Vince Lombardi out there, and you still got to get out there. You still got to practice. You still have to execute. And that's the question right now. Nobody knows for any team how far along these teams are. So I think to say that, Washington or Dallas has an advantage over the Giants at this point, I don't know that I would go so far as to say that right now.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. Everyone's in the same boat. And like you said, we're not even sure, not only are training camps starting on time, but we don't even know if the season's going to kick off at the right moment. Patty Traina from GiantsCountry.com, from SI. She's literally everywhere. If you look up Giants, she's right there. Patty, real quick, want to let everybody know where they can find you social media wise and where you're located.
Yeah, definitely. You can find me on social media at Patricia_Traina, Traina. You can find my writings on GiantsCountry.com. That's an SI.com sports channel. So we are publishing multiple articles every day. We're trying to get a little creative here so that you guys have content to take you through to training camp whenever that should start. And the Locked on Giants podcast, which I host. Right now, we're on a summer schedule. We're doing 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But otherwise, once training camp starts, we'll be doing it daily. We have, guests. Right now, we're doing a time machine week theme. Again, trying to be creative, come up with content to fill the gap. But please check us out. And thank you, Randy, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No problem, Pat. I'm going to ask you just to hold on while we sign off here, and I'll talk to you again in 1 second. And guys, thanks for listening to Off Topic and watching us on the Back Sports Page Sports Network. Back later on today with our good friend Danielle McCartan from WFAN, just to talk New York sports. We're just going to hang out and keep the sports talk going. Thank you again, Patty, and we'll talk with you soon during the season.
Thanks, Randy.